Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Iowa State Cyclones Live here on the Voice of College Football Network. I'm your host, Levi Stevenson, also the managing editor over Wide Right and Natty Light. And we are back for the first time in a couple weeks. I'm finally back from Ireland, and Iowa State is 1-0. Iowa State's 1-0. We're going to talk a little bit about the game. We're going to talk about our preview South Dakota later. Before we get into I do want to talk a little bit about the game itself and kind of everything that went on a little bit. I know this is on Thursday, so you've gotten plenty of it throughout the week, but I just a few thoughts on just kind of how everything went as far as just not on the field. For one, if you ever have an opportunity to go visit Ireland, I can't highly recommend it enough. It's a beautiful country. The people there are incredible. And they especially for anybody from TCU or North Carolina watching that is thinking about going to the game next year, absolutely do it. If it's within your financial means to do so, absolutely take the advantage to go to it next year. No question about it. The country really embraces having an American college football game there. They really embrace, especially the city of Dublin really embraces the game. They get into, if they see you walking around with the school logo on your shirt or something like that, they'll ask you hey, are you here for the game and all this or whatever, and they'll ask you questions about it and stuff like that. It was fantastic. Ireland was an amazing country to visit. Everybody was so hospitable. The game day was great. It did rain a little bit off and on that day, but that's kind of par for the course when you're up in the UK Ireland region. That's just kind of how it is. That's just how the weather is. But the game day atmosphere was awesome. The stadium was about 25% Iowa State fans, 25% Kansas State fans, and the rest, 50% was locals and international fans, which is amazing. It wasn't 100% sold out, but because I think the stadium holds 51,000. I want to say there was probably maybe 48,000 people there. So it wasn't quite a sellout, but it was, it was a pretty well attended game. The international fans were really getting into it, stuff like that. It was a fun environment. And I'm just really glad I got to be there because it's probably going to end up being a kind of once in a lifetime thing to go watch Iowa State play, in a game like this. So, an amazing experience. And I would recommend anybody that has the opportunity to go and watch their team play in this game. I couldn't recommend it enough. But let's talk a little bit about the game. So obviously Iowa State comes away with a 24-21 win. Really this game should probably be thought of as a 10-point win, as a 31-21 win. It just because I would say it chose to kneel the game out on the 1 inch line, at the end of the game. That would have been a 31-21 game if Iowa State had chosen to score. So, calling it a 3-point, it is technically a 3-point win, but nobody is going to be talking about, nobody is treating this game like it was some close, nail biter of a finish or anything like that. Everybody that I've seen, from, Iowa State, Kansas, Iowa State people, Kansas State people, national, personalities, everybody walked away with Iowa State was very clearly the better team in the second half, very clearly controlled the game. Just if you're a Kansas State fan, you're probably walking away from that game fairly dejected, saying they were expecting to have all this firepower, especially in the running game. Granted, losing Dylan Edwards after the muff punt didn't help for sure. Dylan Edwards is a good player. It was a little bit weird because they said he was injured, but he also when he got up from the muff punt, he walked off the field normally, so it didn't seem like he was hurt. So I'm not really sure exactly what's going on there. It's certainly possible he tweaked something and he just it just looked fine running off the field, but he was actually in pain. Absolutely possible. But it was just a little bit of a weird situation because it didn't look like he was hurt. But that's what Kansas State is saying. But you still have, Kansas State still had Joe Jackson there, who I know they're high on, and you've still got Avery Johnson. They were still expecting to be able to Um, Still expecting to be able to run the ball fairly consistently, especially against an Iowa State defensive line and defensive front that, the defensive line, especially that struggled last year quite a bit. And with, in the injured linebacker group, Iowa State did give up a lot in the running game. However, anybody that was in the know, which all of you are in the know if you've been watching this show, you were in the know that Iowa State's defense was going to be quite a bit better this year, with having, most or all of the linebackers healthy, having Dom Orange back, having, they weren't really going to take it, they were going to take a pretty big step forward, being healthy at a lot of positions across the field. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that defense. So the defense specifically, I was extremely impressed with in defending Kansas State's running game. Now, did Kansas State get exceptionally creative or anything like that? No, but Kansas State isn't necessarily a lot of, oddball misdirections or anything like that. Usually there's it's a zone blocking scheme where they win in the running game by having athletic ball carriers and by just having a good blocking scheme that is well executed. That's how Kansas State runs the ball. The problem, though, what we found out, and what I think a lot of people that really pay attention to the conference and choose to have a little bit of a critical eye towards Avery Johnson, Iowa State fans, when we watch Avery Johnson, it's very easy to see the athleticism. He's obviously a very athletic kid. He can really run, and when he can get in the open field, he can pick up yardage in a hurry. However, when you run, you can also see a pretty timid ball carrier. He's not really interested in trying to he's not really interested in trying to make somebody miss like in a phone booth. He's relying on essentially making one quick cut and hoping he can outrun a defender versus, trying to push through contact, trying to break a tackle. Sort of like the opposite of Rocco, where Rocco is perfectly happy running between, running through a gap, through an off tackle, following a blocker through, putting his head down, spinning around a defender. Rocco is really, really good at making defenders miss in small space and just being a really hard-nosed runner. Avery Johnson is a good runner when things are going well for him. But what we saw a little bit on Saturday is that if he has to create yardage on his own, he is not really willing to do that. He's not very good at it. Which is a little bit of a shame from his perspective and from Kansas State fans' perspective, because he's got the athleticism that he really should be like an electric runner with the football with his athleticism, but his mentality just isn't there as a runner to really make him a particularly scary threat in the QB run game. Brian brings up a great point here. Their running backs had basically no success. So Kansas State, as a team, so they had 27 carries, 4.1 yards a rush, which is not really, that's not Kansas State football. Kansas State football likes to get 5, 6, even maybe 7 yards a carry. Their offense is built on really being able to move the ball. Holding Kansas State to 4.1 yards a carry is a really, really nice number. And specifically, and you look at Avery Johnson's rushing touchdown, that was like 20 yards or something like that. You take out that 20-yard run on kind of a broken play. That's not, that wasn't initially part of the running game necessarily. And actually, no, that's a lie. That was on a read option. That the one I'm thinking of was on a read option. That's a fair one to factor into the running game. But there were other stuff where Avery Johnson really didn't do much. But also Joe Jackson's biggest run of the game, he fumbled at the end of it because Drew Sturgis punched the ball out. So you really bottled up Kansas State very well all day. And frankly, a big part of that was the day that Dom Orange had in the middle of that defensive line, where he was eating up at least 2 guys, a lot of times even a triple team in the center of that defensive line, like the whole day, basically. And it allowed Ikene Eziogu, if you guys remember here, Ikene Eziogu was a guy that I was talking about, identified as, if this guy can turn it on, if he can play with a motor, he can be smarter with how he plays his position, he can be a really good player. We saw Ikene Eziogu knock down a couple passes we saw him knock down a couple passes on Saturday. We saw him shooting gaps in the running game. He had a really nice day too. I was very impressed with the Kenny's Yogi. Not perfect, but he was very good. And in tandem with with Dom Orange having a very very good game in the middle of that and causing a lot of problems for Kansas State's offensive line. You know, that was a great. I was really really happy with how the defensive line got their first foot forward basically. They still have plenty a long ways to go. It's to become a they were above average on Saturday. They weren't exceptional. They were above average, but there's a lot of room to grow there. But I thought they got off to a really, really good start. And they were, frankly, they were good the whole game. Iowa State locked down Kansas State's running back or running game virtually the entire game. I mean, they never got a running game going. And so Kansas State really needed to win with Avery's arm. And as kind of predicted, he also had trouble throwing that. We'll get to that here in a second. So the Dukes are brought up a great one here. Marcus Neal. We'll talk about him a little bit, but he had an exceptional day. I think he was the highest rated. He was the highest graded player overall for Iowa State coming out of the game from Pro Football Focus. He had a great game. But if you're Iowa State coming out of this game and you're able to hold Kansas State's run game to 4.1 yards a carry, Avery Johnson was almost a non-factor in the running game. They never got it going. That's a great piece for you to build on going forward, especially going into playing a team like Iowa in a couple weeks. Now we're not overlooking South Dakota, but schematically Kansas State is Iowa, but a little bit more athletic and a little bit more dynamic. So whereas Iowa's got a better offensive line, they're going to win more through power and execution and stuff like that. But similar vibe is if you can handle Kansas State's running game, you can deal with Iowa's running game. And I was really, really encouraged by that. And especially as the game went on, you could tell the Iowa State's defensive line, frankly, was wearing down Kansas State's offensive line. If you can eventually get a pass rusher involved here where you can really start putting a lot of pressure on the quarterback in the passing game, that's not necessarily what Iowa State's defense is looking to do all the time. But if you can get them, get one free once in a while, whether it's a linebacker or a safety off the edge or whatever it is, or a defensive lineman, and get a little bit more pressure on the quarterback, this whole thing levels up pretty quickly. Great first start for the defense with everybody getting back. Caleb Bacon was all over the field. Caleb Rosina made some good plays. He did get hurt at one point, but I think from what I understood, it was pretty minor. He should be fine. The linebackers had a great day. They rotated like 6, 7 guys there. I thought that I was really impressed with that. But to talk a little bit more about Marcus Neal, Iowa State had the secondary unit I was super impressed with. What we did see, we had heard that Jeremiah Cooper was getting ready to start taking snaps at corner. It was a little bit up in the air exactly how much he was going to take, how many snaps he was going to take at corner, but he essentially played, the second corner across from Jontez Williams the entire game. I don't think he took one snap at safety. He was at corner the whole game. And the reason for that is because Iowa State has now debuted a safety group that frankly is one of the most this is like maybe the most excited I've ever been about the safeties. And that's saying something considering Iowa State safeties have always been pretty good. Especially since 2020, when you're looking at Bo Freeler and Malik Verdon and all these guys back there, this group of safeties, it has immediately ratcheted up my excitement for this. It was led by Marcus Neal, who we had heard was getting ready, was going to be taking a bunch of snaps, was going to play quite a bit. And boy, howdy, did he have a good game on Saturday. Consistently blowing up run plays at line of scrimmage, especially there was a 4th down conversion there. I believe it was I want to say it was in the first quarter. Just totally blew it up right at the line of scrimmage. Kenny Yogu shot the gap, and then Marcus Neal came over and hit Avery Johnson in the gap to stop Kansas State at the goal line. I think it was in the second quarter actually. But he was all over the place. He was a entire enforcer in the run defense game, was all over the place, covering the pass. He had a great day. Did Brazina come back in? I don't know if he ever came back in and played more snaps, but I do know that he's like, I think the expectation is that he's going to be fine. I don't know if like he'll go limited snaps on Saturday just as a precaution or anything like that. I'm not sure. But because we're not going to get an injury report this week, I think it seems like the plan is to only release injury reports for Big 12 conference games, since it is a Big 12 conference initiative. So we're not going to get an injury report this week. But I was also very impressed with the other young safeties. So Kajan Cummings Coleman was a guy that he was, got tons and tons of hype through camp, and he got his first major action of his career on Saturday. Now he did give up the last long ball from Avery Johnson. Frankly, he was really like one and a half steps short of picking that off. It's easy to look at that and say like, oh, they completed a long pass for a touchdown. But if you watch that play, if Kajan Cummings Coleman even just freezes for a second instead of taking a step towards the out route towards Jace Brown underneath and just freezes for 1 second and then goes back out to defend that go ball, he picks that off because that ball was a lame duck. That was not a good throw by Avery Johnson, but they got lucky that Kajan Cummings Coleman bit on that underneath route and came up to try to help on that. Outside of that, I was very impressed with KCC, and frankly, his emergence is the reason that Jeremiah Cooper was able to move over and play full-time corner. So, one thing of note, I guess I haven't heard anything, but KCC did appear to pick up some sort of little tweak to his groin or something like that on Saturday. He appeared to play through it, on the blown thing, on the blown coverage. He chased the receiver down. He was hobbling a little bit at the end of it, but I mean, he was full speed, chasing that guy down. So I think he's fine. I haven't heard anything otherwise. But that'll be just maybe something to keep an eye on. Maybe he gets a little bit of rest this week and doesn't play. Hopefully Iowa State's pulling away and you can play some other young safeties. You can play Drew Surges more and stuff like that. The other one I want to talk about is another freshman, Carson Van Dinter. Now, Carson Van Dinter was responsible for the first blown coverage that ended up with the free Jace Brown touchdown. However, earlier in the game, throughout the rest of the game, Carson Van Dinter was very, very good. He was up in the run game, just like Marcus Neal was, had a really nice game. And frankly, this guy was talking mad shit. Earlier in the game, he blew up a reverse. And he blew up a reverse. I think I want to say maybe John Tez ended up making the tackle, but Carson Van Dinter blew up the reverse, well behind the line of scrimmage, got up and immediately started talking noise to this dude. This group between Neal, Van Dinter, and Kajan Cummings Coleman, they have like big time athleticism. If you look at Kajan Cummings Coleman as a safety, that dude is jacked. That is the body of an SEC, like a high end SEC enforcer safety. And same with Marcus Neal. I mean, these guys are huge and they're flying around in the running game. I'm extremely excited about this secondary now, knowing that those three are back there, because that is as elite as depth gets at the safety position in this conference and frankly in college football. They were unbelievable. But all this is to also not to take away from Jamison Patton, who had a very good game himself, made some really nice plays. Drew Surges forced the fumble by Joe Jackson, which was recovered by Tayshaun James. So you have, Iowa State played 6 safeties out there. You had Kajan Cummings Coleman, Carson Van Dinter, Marcus Neal, Jamison Patton, Drew Surges, and Tayshaun James, and all of them had a really nice game. On top of that, you've got the best corner in the conference, and I would argue one of the best in college football, in Jontez Williams. And now, how good Iowa State's safeties are and how good Iowa State's secondary is. They took their best safety and moved him to corner to make room for more safeties. Like that is kind of an absurd thing to be able to do, to take your best safety, move him to a different position because the rest of your safeties are so good you can't keep them off the field. It was wild to watch this run defense on Saturday. And frankly, like I was expecting them to be better, but I was expecting them to have a little bit more difficulty with it. Just because Kansas State's a good, like just a good, solid team. They've got good skill position players. They've got good athleticism. But holy cow, they could do nothing against Iowa State's defense. Nothing. Like the running game was completely non-existent, and that was because Marcus Neal and all those safeties and the linebackers were all over the place. Gosh, was that an impressive defensive performance? That has completely, like, in my mind, if the defense plays that well every week, um, at this point, you're talking about being favored in basically every game, not just like Iowa State's got a shot to win every game. At this point, Iowa State, if that defense shows up every week, Iowa State will be favored in every single game they play this season. And you're talking about that has raised the ceiling of this team, the offense needs to get it together a little bit, and they can hopefully get back to 8-9 something wins. Right now, based on what I just saw, that 7.5 over under win total that Vegas put out is a joke. That, like, if you're not hammering the shit out of that over, if they haven't reset that under over to 8.5 at this point, then jump on it immediately. The defense was unbelievable. Yeah, I would say it's running 5 defensive backs out there, and Kansas State could do nothing in the run game. Nothing. Now, granted, it helps that Matt Wells from Kansas State refused to get creative, refused to do anything interesting. But that's also not Iowa State's job to worry about that. Iowa State is tasked with defending what they're asked to defend, and they did it excellently. They were great. Couldn't be more excited about this defense going forward, especially because the 2 times that they did mess up in pass coverage are they're very, very easy fixes on tape. It's literally just a matter of knowing where to keep your eyes. Both Carson and Kaijon Cummings-Coleman essentially had their eyes in the wrong spot. They bit on a route underneath them instead of just sitting back. That is it. That is 5 minutes in the film room saying, hey, when you have this, you need to sit back and not worry about it. Not worry about the guy in front of you, because you've got a corner and a linebacker that have come over to guard that, and you have to take the deep route. That's it. That's the whole fix. And as long as they do that, that's it. If you eliminate those positions, that game turns into a 4-score beatdown versus Kansas State. I'm so excited for this defense now. That safety group has me fucking bricked up, man. I am really enthusiastic about that safety group. Dom Orange was dominant. I said it before. Most games Iowa State plays, he will be the best individual player on the football field, period. He just is the best football player on the field most of the time. I can't immediately think of Utah. Or I guess they don't play Utah right now. If they meet Utah in the title game or something like that, then they have an offensive lineman that's really good. There's maybe a random here and there, but for the most part, Dominic Orange is going to be the best football player on the field. Aiden Flora did have a good game as a return man. It's a good point. I think he was named like special teams player of the week or something like that. I mean, there's only a couple games to pick from, but I think the plan is still to eventually have Xavier Townsend back there, but I think he's still kind of coming back off injury a little bit and kind of getting caught up to speed. Maybe Aiden Flora just kind of won the job there by just having a good game. But it appears that Iowa State has options back there at return man either way. So that's definitely encouraging. I do want to move on to the offensive side of the football now. And I think the biggest story of the day by far, is how well the offensive line responded to some early adversity and really took over the game late. Keep in mind, coming into this game, the scouting report on Kansas State defensively is their front 7 is really good. Really, really good. Secondary needs some help, but their front 7 is really, really good. That was absolutely true. In the first quarter, Kansas State's front 7, their defensive line especially, was giving Iowa State tons of problems on the offensive line. They sacked Rocco a few times. They forced a strip sack. They got a few other long sacks, blew up some plays. Their defensive line was, especially on some fairly easy stunts, was causing tons and tons of problems. It was very clear that Iowa State was still, trying to get everything smoothed out while Kansas State's veteran defensive line was, they're ready to go right away. They're running Texas 4-man stunts and stuff like that. They're running little TE stunts off to the side. They're doing that first quarter of the first game because they're such a veteran group. Iowa State was not ready for that. That's another thing that can be fixed on tape pretty quick, just as far as, knowing when to pass off a block, when to, how to pick up a stunt guy, things like that. That stuff can be fixed on tape. However, as the game went on, the offensive line got better and better and better. And by the time you got into the third and fourth quarter, I can't believe I'm going to say this sentence right now. Iowa State's offensive line was dominant in the fourth quarter. Like really, really good. Kansas State is well regarded to have like one of the better front sevens like in college football. They're really good. Now, granted, they're missing like Asa Newsome and stuff like that, but that line is really good. And Iowa State's offensive line was pushing them around like a lot. They were getting anything they wanted. And it really opened up the run game in the third and fourth quarter. And, you couldn't be more impressed with how that line progressed through the game. Now, you need to do that. You need to keep doing that, keep building on that versus South Dakota. Like, ideally, you get to South Dakota, that line should really, we're looking for that line to really start leaning on South Dakota. They don't need to be dominant necessarily, but like you need to be able to pick it back up, go to next week and start off and like, okay, they're doing some stuff. They're not getting beat by an FCS defensive line. This should be a team that's still getting some room in the running game early and then eventually starts really, really forcing the issue as the game goes on. You want to be able to see building on that foundation that they laid down against Kansas State. It seems like they got a good group there. Marcus Neal was rough early. Tyler Miller lit up a sack, but I'm not worried about him. Neal, left tackle, James Neal. James Neal was rough early, gave up a sack, just kind of got pushed around a little bit. Eventually turned it around, was really good. Dylan Barrett had a nice game. Jim Boniface was, had a tough game early, eventually got better. Brennan Black picked it up. He was good. That offensive line being able to do what they did to Kansas State's offensive or to their defensive line, into their linebackers was really, really impressive. And I think that has renewed, I shouldn't say renewed, but it sort of, well, maybe renewed is the right word. It was because, coming into any football season, we're always, it's always the careful optimism, the cautious optimism about the offensive line. It's like, oh, they're going to be able to put it together. They're going to be any good, stuff like this. That first game against that front seven should give every Iowa State fan hope that this might actually be the year that they're decent. Granted, it's one game. They could fall apart and go back to what they usually are, which is wildly inconsistent. But if they can build on that, we might have our first really good offensive line in the Campbell area since the Fiesta Bowl team. And boy, howdy, would that change the outlook of this thing. If you can run the ball consistently, you can do what you got to do with that offensive line. I think it raises the floor of this team and frankly, it raises the ceiling of it, maybe even more than raises the floor. The floor is always going to be there because you have a great quarterback. You've got good skill position players. The floor is going to be there. Having a good offensive line that makes the running game work a lot better raises the ceiling of this team pretty dramatically. We are already looking at this team as a team without really any major deficiencies, a really good middle of the roster, a really, really deep roster with no major flaws. Now you're looking at the safeties are unbelievably good. The running game is working. Rocco is Rocco. And we're going to talk about Rocco here in a little bit. And the wide receivers didn't even have like a great game. Dominic Overby made a nice catch. Brett Eskleton made a great catch in the end zone. But, the offensive line was the star of the show. And that's a big deal for Iowa State because that is not something that they've been able to rely on much, in recent years. And Rocco indeed is still Rocco. First quarter, little rough. They were trying to get going. Now, granted, the offensive line was having tons of problems, so Rocco wasn't really able to get into a good rhythm early, just because the offensive line was having so many problems with Kansas State's defensive line. Then you have the bad pitch on the Sama fumble. That play, I didn't love the play call, one, because it was wet and it was raining. So I didn't love the play call, the inside pitch, which I would say has had success on the pass. Kyle Shanahan and Randy Reed, like, they live for the inside pitch at the goal line. Like, the play itself is not flawed. It's a good play. In that situation, was it an unnecessary risk? I think so. Like, I think you're better off to just run a nice A gap dive type of thing. Just hand it off. But, on that play, should Sama have caught it? Yes. I mean, it's right here. He should have caught that. However, Rocco's pitch should have been in his gut or at his chest. It shouldn't have been up here at his face mask. It was a bad pitch, should have been caught. It's 51% Rocco, 49% Sama. I mean, in the end, it didn't really matter a ton, but, didn't love that play. As the game went on, as Rocco does, he got more comfortable. The throws to he only ended up at 50% completion percentage, which is low, but the context here, Cooper, there was a number of missed easy catches. Cooper Alexander dropped that really easy one for the first down. He'll never drop that one again, but he dropped it. I want to say Eli Green dropped one. Dama Overby could have caught a couple of them. His completion percentage could have been, his completion percentage deserved to be better based on the passes he threw. But as you got going on, we saw the Rocco we always see, which is just a dude that if you need a first down, he's going to get you a first down. He's a tough runner. He makes guys miss in space, makes the throws when you need to. I tell you what, though, those touchdown throws to Dominic Overby and Brett Esselson were elite. That was an NFL caliber throw to both of them. And they were inch perfect throws. Could not have made a better throw in either situation. Another throw that I think is a little bit slept on that should get more credit because it looked a little goofy when it happened, but the 3rd and 1 tight end outlet pass to Gabe Burkle off the RPO, it was high and it was a difficult catch for Burkle because it was high and he had to kind of torque his body around and catch it kind of over his shoulder and bring it down, and it was a little awkward to watch. But if you watch the camera from behind the line of scrimmage, the sky cam that was flying around, there was a linebacker there, and Rocco basically had to get it over the linebacker and just to where Gabe Burkle had it. I mean, that was where Rocco put it was the only place it could have been and still been a completion. There was a number of throws that were literally just inch perfect, and there was a couple he missed, which fair. I mean, sometimes people miss throws. It happens. Week 0, it's raining. Not worried about that. I'm not worried about Rocco's accuracy, especially on deep throws. But he was making high level throws, NFL level throws that you like, and not just NFL level throws, but throws you're expecting, like you would expect a Joe Burrow to make, something like that. He was making excellent throws. So it was great to see too, because if you go on social media after the game, during the game, the national audience that's watching this game now is raving about Rocco Becht. And everything I've heard about that since then, even Kansas State fans are saying, like, they're saying that we love Avery. We think he can be great. But if you're asking me to take one of them right now, I'm taking Rocco. And it's like, you should. Everybody, like, if you're asking somebody right now to take who Rocco is right now versus, the Rocco Becht you got last week versus the Avery Johnson you got last week, you take Rocco 10 times out of 10. Were his total yards as high as Avery Johnson? No. But there was one that was very obviously better than the other one. And it was Rocco was very obviously the better quarterback on Saturday than Avery Johnson. He gritted it out, picked up big first downs when you need to. The touchdown run was awesome. The good news, Rocco is still Rocco. Will he forever, struggle in the first quarter and then just make up for it for the rest of the game? You hope he eventually just is fourth quarter Rocco for the whole game. You eventually hope he gets to that point. We'll figure it out. That's a point of growth for him. I'm sure he doesn't want to keep starting slow, but that's his point of growth right now. Oh, Lincoln says on the pitch, 25% Rocco, 25% Abu, 50% conditions. Honestly, totally fair. It was a tough play call in the situation. I probably would have just handed it off, but it also just needed to be executed better. So I just think when you have a quarterback as like Rocco that's as dependable in crunch situations, in crunch time, in critical situations, third and fourth down, that is such a massive advantage. I mean, college athletes in general are noted. There are more stories of failure in critical situations across the history of college football than there are successes. In general, you expect, college players are felt to it feels less likely that a college player will make a big play in crunch time than obviously than an NFL player or something like that. But that's why that's part of the chaos. That's why like nobody trusts college kickers because it seems like they always miss in crunch time, stuff like that. College athletes in general are not considered, like, they're not expected to be clutch. Rocco, that dude was born in the clutch. Like it's pretty incredible the composure that kid has when he is put in a difficult situation. The composure Rocco plays with is just, I've never seen anything like it. I mean, no diss to Brock Purdy, but Brock Purdy didn't show the grit, just the pure, unfiltered, full frontal grit that Rocco shows on a game by game basis. It's frankly, it's mesmerizing to watch how reliable he is at picking up third and fourth downs in critical situations. It's unbelievable. Ooh, interesting question. Which is better historically, KSU O-line or Iowa line? I think the obvious answer here is the Iowa offensive line. Now Kansas State's offensive line is always good. It was better under Bill Snyder. But I mean, Iowa's had a good offensive line for decades at this point. I mean, all of the Kirk Ferentz era, all of the Hayden Fry era. I mean, Iowa has, generally speaking, had a very good offensive line for half a century. Kansas State had good lines for, they had good lines under Bill Snyder, but before that they were awful. I mean, they were really, really bad. And under Ron Prince, they were really bad. Bill Klein, Bill Klein. Chris Kleinman's lines have been pretty good, but not as consistent as Bill Snyder's lines. I think this one is a fairly easy choice for Iowa as far as the offensive line goes. And that's why it will be a bigger challenge for the defensive line. That's why you like how well they played against Kansas State, because there's a natural progression there to, you step it up again against Iowa and you can do something very similar. Iowa is not nearly as dynamic on in the run, is not nearly as dynamic on offense as Kansas State is. They don't have nearly the athletes Kansas State does. Dukester with a great point here. So Abu's vision was improved in this one. Absolutely. We got to see a little bit more. It's a shame that we couldn't see it more with when the offensive line was really pushing people around. But Abu, it was clear to me that Abu has taken another step forward in his vision. We need to keep seeing him do that, keep seeing him improve. But the early returns on what we needed from Abu as far as his improvement, his offseason improvement, what he needed to work on, the early returns are very positive there. I really liked how he was being patient, finding cutback lanes, following blockers to the hole he needs. I was very impressed with Abu Sama. He did it as much as he could with not a lot of running room. And, so for that reason, I thought he had a really nice game. He only had 40 something yards, but the inside context of that 40 yards is they did a really nice job. And yeah, you're right. Both backs looked really good in the second half. Now I would say only rushed for 130 yards as a team, but you have to factor in a few fairly good sized sacks in there. They really were probably more like 150, 160 yards in that neighborhood of positive rushing yards with the running backs. So, or just with the running game in general, because in college, sacks count against the rushing total. So in general, they But they ran the damn ball 46 times. And when you can sit there and reliably get some yards for 46 carries, that is going to wear that defense down quite a bit. And this goes into my next point. I teased this earlier in the Discord earlier this week, and I want to talk about it now. But the running back management in this game. Now, since everyone's, I need a drink real quick. Since I really originally brought this up, we've gotten some quotes in press conferences saying that it was unintentional. Yeah, how they used the running backs were a little unintentional, but it just kind of worked out that way. Where Carson Hansen basically played the entire first quarter. Sama was quarters 2 and 3, and then Hansen came back in the fourth quarter. So basically, it was bookended by Carson Hansen with Abu Sama in the middle. They said it was just kind of a coincidence that's how it happened to work out, and that's how they wanted to do it based on the kind of who was the hot hand at the time. Maybe that's true. Maybe it was a happy accident. Whether or not it was a happy accident or it was deliberate planning. If it was deliberate planning, I think this plan was absolutely genius. If it was an accident, then Iowa State stumbled upon a really fun blueprint for beating good defenses with the running game. So here's why I love this. Early in the game, especially against maybe it's a new defensive front, against a strong defensive front, you're trying to just find soft spots. You're trying to find little spots in the defense where you think you can get something. Maybe it's on certain looks out of the A, in an A gap power. Maybe it's on a stretch. Maybe it's on a buck sweep or something like that. Maybe you got a split zone. Just trying to find little soft spots to figure out where you can eventually start attacking. Maybe it's a defensive end that's not playing a good game, whatever it was. That's a good spot for Carson Hansen, who is a north-south guy, no nonsense. He's going to hit the ground running. I would compare him favorably to like an Isaiah Pacheco for the Kansas City Chiefs, where he is just running angry the whole time. He's trying to find a hole, get upfield, put his feet in the turf, and just beat the shit out of the ground and anybody else in his way. I do like the Isaiah Pacheco comparison for Carson Hansen. He's good for that situation where you're just trying to poke and prod a little bit and figure out what you can get going. Because he's not going to, you can pretty much count on him not really ever taking a negative carry. He's going to keep moving north, south. He's not going to screw around too much where it's messing with the blocking scheme or it's kind of, giving false positives basically. Then it comes the second quarter. You're starting to get a little bit of room. Maybe you've started to figure some stuff out. You bring in a different back. He's fresh, hasn't played yet, totally fresh in the second quarter. And he brings in a different dynamic, different skill set. Maybe can bounce it outside a little bit more. You can test some new things out. You can tell, if you've got some early stuff that you think is going to start working, you can test it out with him because he's got the home run ability. Where he can, if you find one and find a good spot in that second and third quarter, he can take it to the house. But otherwise, it's going to allow you to try some new things, and he's still going to be fresh. By the time the middle of third quarter rolls around, early, middle, third quarter, your halftime adjustments roll around, you're starting to find some stuff. You're figuring out what you're doing. You know how you're going to start attacking this thing. And you can take your most athletic back and really start going after and try to getting some chunk plays. But really at this point, you're just continuing to kind of lean on the defense, wear them out a little bit, get yardage where you can, keep trying stuff. By the time the fourth quarter rolls around, you know what you're doing. You know how you're going to attack this defense in the running game. Largely know what's probably going to work, what's not going to work, what kind of looks have had success, how you can play off of those into other looks. That really fun. I think it's Coach Dan Casey on Twitter broke it down. There's a play that I see ran. It was an A gap power that you had a tight end come over essentially on a split zone. And then on the snap, Carson Hansen came behind Rocco to the other side. So it worked a little bit like a counter and then followed through there, followed a tight end through, or no, followed a pulling guard through the A gap. And it got like 8 or 10 yards or something like that. Stuff like that. You've figured out that you can do this. You figure out the spots you can use this. But now you're bringing Carson Hansen back in, who is fresh. He hasn't had a carry since the first quarter. His legs are fresh. You are now looking at a defense that's been, they've been defending 30, 35 carries at this point. They're getting worn down. That's a lot of running game to stop. And all of a sudden, you've got a fresh Carson Hansen who is your hammer, now north-south, an absolute hammer, pile driving into this defense through these weak spots and these through these weak spots that you've found in the defense. And if for any of you Dungeons and Dragons fan here, this is Iowa State auto-critting on the running game for an entire quarter. Just bang, 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 delivering dagger after dagger after dagger in the running game. You watch what Iowa State did with the running game in that fourth quarter with Carson Hansen. It was 6 yards, 8 yards, 12 yards, 8 yards, 10 yards, over and over and over again. And just absolutely dominated the game with the running backs. Because Iowa State basically got to play with a fresh running back the entire game. You have two good running backs. So you played fresh the whole game, different skill sets. And all this while, the defense is getting winded and gassed because they're trying to deal with this running game that is carrying it 46 times, which is so many running plays they have to defend. But also, they've got 2 touchdowns through the air, and they keep hitting you in the seam with the tight ends. So you have to worry about defending Ben Bramer and Gabe Burkle in the seam. You've already gotten beat over the top with Dom Overby and Brett Eskelson. They've almost beat you over the top with Chase Sowell. Eli Green's got a couple nice ones. You're worried about what they're doing in the passing game because they've already beat you a couple times. But you're still having to deal with Carson Hansen just shanking you for an entire quarter for 10 yards at a time, over and over and over again. That is fucking hell. I would not want to be on defense in that situation. Going forward, this can be the plan for Iowa State. Do you need to run the ball 50 times a game? No. But what you can do, you can manage these running backs in a way, and you can move them around based on how you feel like the game flow is going, who's having a good game, riding the hot hand and all this. But we saw Iowa State deploy this thing in a way that feels like cheating, where you can have 2 Doak Walker candidate running backs in the game. You have them at the same time. They did run 22 personnel, like I kind of hope they would have. They ran 22 personnel on Abu Sama on a buck sweep with Carson Hansen as the lead blocker, which is disgusting. And they got creative in the run game, but you had 2 fresh Doak Walker candidate running backs the whole game, and an offensive line that was creating tons and tons of room, especially as the game went on, because the defense got worn down. And then I was able to rip their damn heart out in the passing game on 3rd and 4th down. That was diabolical on the part of Iowa State. I don't know if it was intentional to manage the running game that way. If it was, genius level of management of these guys by the coaching staff. If it was just kind of that's how it worked out, congratulations. You've got the perfect game plan to make life a living hell for defenses this entire year. Because I can tell you firsthand that having to deal with a game like that on defense is miserable. It is hell on earth to defend an offense that can do that will just sit there and just gouge you over and over in the running game with a running back that's already a nightmare to tackle, that a safety or a corner is really totally unfit to bring down in a one-on-one situation, or at least bring down for not losing, without giving up 4 extra yards for him falling forward. And also they're going to hit you over the top with one of the best tight end duos in college football and 2 receivers that have already burnt you over the top. How do you defend that? You don't. You can't defend that. And also, this is all happening. Meanwhile, Taylor Mauser, the offensive coordinator, is spending the entire 3rd and 4th quarter pantsing you with all these play calls. The 3rd and 1 leak out to Gabe Burkle, we called it a couple weeks ago that Iowa State was going to want to do these tight end leak outs in the seam and stuff like that. Right there. Gabe Burkle converted the 3rd and 1. 4th and 3 to seal the game. Actually it was before that. You hit Ben Bramer up in the seam to move up the field on an RPO. And then you hit Carson Hansen in the flat. The play calling was disgusting from Taylor Mauser in the best way possible. The dude is a madman, and I Love it. He's aggressive. He's aggressive when he needs to be. He's conservative. He doesn't get over aggressive very often. Sometimes he does, but I'd rather him be a little too aggressive than not aggressive enough. The Iowa State coached circles around Kansas State in this game. Kansas State fans were livid on Twitter. They're tired of Kleiman getting, taken out back behind the woodshed by Campbell on a year in, year out basis, where Iowa State is coaching circles around Chris Kleiman and Kansas State. It was that game was as good as you could. Yeah, this is exactly right. Hey, Cox the professor, Mouse is the mad scientist. I mean, if Iowa State can continue to play the way that well, it wasn't perfect, but if they can play that well in all these games this season, I'm going to start saying some irresponsible shit about week 4. I'm going to start saying some real irresponsible shit if Iowa State keeps playing that well. And, I couldn't have been more impressed in the second half with how Iowa State managed all of that. And, oh gosh, what a great way to start the season. We got tired of the slow starts there for a number of years where it was like you really put up a dud against an FCS and you lose to Iowa and this or whatever. That was the best start to a season we've ever had for Matt Campbell. It's a huge win. Iowa State's in a massive point of leverage going through Big 12 season to get back to Arlington. So all around, basically a perfect weekend for Iowa State. You also made it out, to my knowledge, without any major injuries. Love it. Every week. So now this is the first time we've been doing the show in season. The show has been entirely an off-season show up to this point because we started it after the Pop-Tarts Bowl last year. But we are now in season. So what I'm going to do is every week I'm going to declare an offensive MVP and a defensive MVP. This week, the offensive MVP goes to Rocco Becht. I understand that I was just gushing about the running backs forever. The offensive line was great. But Rocco really, those 2 throws he made to the wide receivers were unbelievable. His ability to convert in 3rd and 4th down on a few different occasions, especially with his legs, was just fantastic. This was a Rocco. It was quietly, Rocco really making tons of plays in this one. Even though it was a great team effort to win this thing, I think Rocco just made the plays that needed to be made. And there's a reason he won MVP of the game too. Rocco had a great game. Defensive MVP could go to a lot of different people here. Marcus Neal certainly deserving, but I'm going to give it to Dominique Orange. His control of the interior of the trenches there was nothing short of spectacular. He was the engine that allowed Marcus Neal to be as effective as he was, because Dominic Orange is busy eating up 2 or even 3 defenders on a lot of plays. And he is what allows the linebackers to be a go-around, Ikenez Yogo to have a big game, Marcus Neal to come down and have a big game. It all starts with Dom Orange. And being able to slow down Kansas State's running game the way they did is Dom. It just incredibly impressive performance from him. So offensive MVP to Rocco Becht, defensive MVP to Dominic Orange. Special shout out to the Cup Snake at the game. If you ever wanted a better advertisement for why Iowa State should have beer at the stadium, it's because we are an engineering school and we have it in our bones we drink beer, put beer cup together, make beer cup thing tall, make more tall beer cup snakes, stack them up, go to the second deck. If you had these cups at Iowa State games, the beer cup snakes would reach the clouds. We would figure out how to build this thing. We could create an entire 3rd deck on the stadium just out of our beer cup snakes. They would be remarkable. They would be a work of science and art. The beer cup snake was fabulous. And that was Iowa State's real first attempt. Iowa State Cyclone fans really, the first attempt at a true beer snake. And it was marvelous. It was glorious. Give us more beer snakes. Iowa State fans were born to create cup beer snakes at football games. It's in our DNA. Alrighty, let's move on to the South Dakota Coyotes. South Dakota last year made to the FCS semifinals in the playoffs where they lost to Montana State. And eventually South Dakota State won the title, obviously. But South Dakota was a very good team last year, led by former Iowa State quarterback Aiden Bauman, son of Todd Bauman. Obviously, he was in the same recruiting class as Hunter Deckers. He was on the Fiesta Bowl team, interestingly enough. Eventually transferred out for playing time, understandable. And with South Dakota, he has been very good. Let me pull up his stats here real quick. So over his career, he's sitting right at, with full playing time, he's sitting right at about 67, 68% for his career. Over the last 2 seasons, he's at 34 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. Very good, touchdown interception rate. Just overall, just a good quarterback. Just shy of 3,000 yards last season. He's a good thrower of the football. Worth noting is he is an absolute statue in the pocket. He's not moving around at all. He is not a threat with his legs. Not consistently. I mean, maybe he gets out and picks up a few yards here and there, but he's not going to be a consistent threat with his legs. But he's a good, smart, efficient passer that takes care of the ball. It'd be a good challenge for Iowa State taking on a veteran quarterback like this, especially one that is going to be at least a little bit familiar with the defense. So, good challenge here. South Dakota they have a new coach. Their longtime coach retired this past year. So they've got a new coaching staff. They've got a lot of new players. Aiden Bauman is one of the only guys returning, but I think they're preseason number 4, number 5 in the FCS poll. They're expected to be very, very good. I would say, I believe, is like a 15.5 point favorite right now, which I think is probably about right. From what I understand, based on analytics, South Dakota would be probably like a 3-point favorite on a neutral field over like Oklahoma State and maybe even a toss up with UCF type of thing. Like, South Dakota's a good football team. That said, this should be a game where Iowa State shows up and, maybe chunks it out early. They're not going to do much. They're not going to throw the ball. They're not going to, test. They're going to test South Dakota deep a lot or anything like that. My guess is the game plan will look a lot like Kansas State, where they're going to try to run and run and run and run, get that thing going, keep getting the offensive line run blocking reps and all that. So, I don't expect like a high flying game plan from Iowa State. It'll probably look closer than it is. But based on what I saw from the defense last Saturday, I would be I think something would have to go wrong, or South Dakota would have to have some ace in the hole that nobody knows about for Iowa State to give up more than like 13 or 14 points type of thing. Like, I would be pretty shocked if South Dakota made it into the 20s. That said, I would, this feels like a game. It's going to be a tough one, but Iowa State should win this one going away. Like, by the time you're getting into the fourth quarter, this should start feeling like not much of a game. So, going into this, this is a great spot. It's a tough spot for Iowa State where, it's a good test for them because they have to come back off their, shortened week, their sleep schedule and all that to face a tough opponent. But this should be a game that they win. My prediction here, give me Iowa State to win this thing 31-13 going away in the fourth quarter. I would expect a good running game. You'll be a little bit more efficient. I think Iowa State technically ended up at like 2.8 yards a carry or something like that on Saturday. But anybody that watched that game knows that running game was really starting to take off in the second half. If Iowa State's in that 4 or 5 yards a carry, area against South Dakota, this game could get, start, getting multiple possessions, in the second, third quarter type of thing. This just needs to be a game where Iowa State goes in, plays good enough. You don't need to blow them away or anything like that. It'd be great if you did. You don't need to blow them away. Just keep building, and the offensive line needs to keep building. You want to see another game out of those young safeties, seeing what they can do, especially against a quarterback that's savvy and will be on an NFL roster at some point. So, but give me a 31-13 Iowa State in a game that doesn't, it doesn't feel, maybe it just doesn't feel like it's that close. Even though 31-13 is really not that close, but it feels like a blowout as a 31-13 game. Expect a good game from Dominic Orange. South Dakota doesn't have the horses that Kansas State does on the offensive line. I would be pretty surprised if Dominic Orange doesn't cause a ton of problems for South Dakota State in the middle. They're going to have to put 3 bodies on him. They're going to have to. And I think that's a great opportunity for Akenezi Ogu to step up. Maybe Caleb Bacon come off the edge, get some pressure on Bauman since he's not moving around much. Big opportunity for Iowa State to keep building on this as you prepare for Iowa the following week. So overall, literally as good of a start to the season as you could ever hope for Iowa State. And now it's just you keep building on that and keep seeing what you can do. And you can tell all this week too with Matt Campbell and how he was talking in the press conferences and things like that, that this is not a team resting on their laurels. This is not a team that's saying like, well, we got that thing, we're really great. This is, we're hot shit. This is not that team. And with the attitude I saw out of the young safeties last weekend and how well they played outside of those 2 plays and how they will be able to fix those plays fairly quickly. Cooper Alexander's not going to drop that ball again. Eli Green's not going to continue to drop balls. The conditions will be pretty good on Saturday. I think the forecast is like 73 and sunny. It should be a really nice, really, really nice day on Saturday. This should be a game where you can start seeing, Iowa State really start to get into some nice rhythm on offense. So appreciate everybody coming around. I know it's an odd day for the show this week. Being on Thursday, we'll be back to our normal slot next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central, since we're back on our normal schedule now. And hopefully we're talking about our 2-0 Cyclones as we head into Cyhawk week. I imagine next week I will be doing a show with Corey Breda with in the Eye of the Storm. Their Iowa's channel here on Voice of College Football. We'll see. Be a good time. If anybody is at the game on Saturday, I'll be there as well. Tailgating in lot C3 per usual, probably drinking a Cocoa Quest White Russian, eating some pulled pork. So everybody have a good rest of your week. We'll see you on Saturday. Iowa State Cyclones are 1-0. Go Cyclones.